Imagine you are handed this massive 300-page user manual.
Oh, that sounds awful already.
Right, and it's basically a binding legal contract for a romantic relationship.
Okay, wow.
Yeah, and you are told that you have to memorize every single clause, every penalty, every, operational procedure and contingency plan before you're even allowed to see a photograph of the person you're supposed to marry.
That's just wild.
So you spend 3 grueling years studying the terms and conditions of love. You learn the mechanics of dispute resolution, the proper filing system for anniversary gifts, the theoretical biological limits of human affection.
You'd be an absolute master of the rules of engagement.
Exactly. You could pass a bar exam on the mechanics of romance.
Yeah.
But you have never heard this person's voice. You have never looked them in the eye.
And by the time that person finally walks into the room, you aren't actually looking at a human being anymore.
What are you looking at then?
You're looking at a data set. You're looking at a walking, talking compliance check for this elaborate filing cabinet you just spent 3 years building in your head.
You aren't in love. You are just in compliance.
Right. Exactly.
And that terrifying scenario brings us directly into the heart of today's deep dive. Welcome in, by the way. We are exploring the hidden architecture of how we learn today.
And it is a fascinating topic.
It really is. We are guided by this sweeping structural critique of classical theological and philosophical pedagogy. The sources we are diving into, they basically compare the traditional academic categories of learning against a totally different framework.
This triad of love, light, and life.
Yeah, which is found in historical Johannine writings. But, you do not need to be a theologian to care about this.
No, not at all.
Because at its core, this material reveals a profound, almost disturbing truth about human cognition. We always assume that if the facts in a textbook are accurate, our education is solid.
Right. We inspect the bricks, but we almost never question the floor plan.
Boom. Exactly. We don't ask why the architect of the syllabus decided to put the user manual before the actual person.
Because that floor plan is quietly, invisibly dictating what you believe is fundamentally true about the universe.
And that's the hook for today. The foundational claim in these sources is that the sequence of teaching is a decision.
Someone, somewhere, decided what you needed to hear first, second, and third.
Yeah.
And when that sequence is left unstated or undefended, it becomes incredibly dangerous because it cannot be examined. You just absorb it as a natural law rather than a human choice.
So I want to push on that for a second. If I'm sitting in a classroom and the professor starts with chapter 1, I just assume chapter 1 is the logical starting point.
Sure, yeah.
Why does the very first thing we learn wield so much power over our cognition? Like, what is the actual mechanism at play in our brains here?
Well, the mechanism is standard setting. Whatever arrives before you have any standard of your own actually becomes the standard by which you judge everything else that follows. Yeah, it is not merely a claim about human memory or, the primacy effect of what you learn earliest.
Right, it's deeper than that.
Much deeper. It is a claim about what a student takes as an absolute given. And the sources use the example of modern systematic theology to illustrate this, and it is just a brilliant case study.
Okay, let's hear it.
So modern systems of theology almost universally start with a category called prolegomena.
Prolegomena. That sounds like a throat-clearing exercise for academics. What does that actually entail?
Right, so it translates roughly to things spoken beforehand. It deals with the method, the possibility, and the sources of knowledge.
Okay.
It asks questions like, how is it possible for a finite human to know anything about an infinite God? Or what are the legitimate rules for philosophical inquiry?
So setting the ground rules.
Exactly. It establishes the criteria for truth before the student is ever introduced to the subject matter itself.
Wait, hold on. Let me play devil's advocate here, because that sounds like basic common sense to me.
Oh, I'm sure it does.
Like, if I want to solve a complex algebraic equation, I need to know the rules of math first. If I want to build a house, I need someone to teach me how to swing a hammer.
Right.
I need to learn how to measure a board and how to read a blueprint before they back up a truck full of lumber. So why is it so subversive to establish the rules of inquiry, the method, before you dive into the deep end of the subject? Don't you need to know how to think before you think about something profound?
Yeah, and that is the exact defense the traditional system uses, but the sources argue it is a fatal trap.
Really? How so?
Because swinging a hammer is a mechanical skill applied to deadwood. But when we were talking about ultimate reality, when we were talking about theology or the fundamental nature of existence, the method you use to study it is never neutral.
Oh, I have.
Yeah. By forcing a student to spend an entire year answering how we know things before they're allowed to look at what we know,
Yeah.
the curriculum makes a massive unstated philosophical claim.
Which is what?
It teaches the student that human methodology is more basic, more foundational, and more reliable than the subject itself.
Ah, here's where it gets really interesting. You are setting up the rules of the game before you even know who is playing.
Precisely. You are building that elaborate filing cabinet from your introductory analogy.
The relationship contract.
Yes. By the time the actual doctrine of God arrives in the student's second year, the student just takes this infinite reality and shoves it into one of the methodological folders they already created.
And the student will be very, very good at filing.
That is the tragedy. The student masters the taxonomy, but the taxonomy was built entirely on human terms. Let me actually paraphrase a quote from the text because it captures this perfectly.
Go for it.
It basically says that a student never told that his sequence was chosen will take it for the shape of the thing itself. A student can argue with a claim, but he cannot argue with a shape.
He cannot argue with a shape. That is chilling.
It really is.
Because if you are handed a sphere, you don't argue that it should have corners. You just accept that the object is round. If you are handed a curriculum that puts method first, you don't argue that reality might be personal or relational. You just accept that reality is fundamentally methodological.
And to prove that these shapes are human choices and not inevitable laws of nature, the sources point to this really fascinating historical discrepancy.
Oh, I love historical discrepancies.
They look back to the 17th century, specifically to the Westminster Assembly in the 1640s.
Let's set the scene there for a minute, because this wasn't just some casual gathering of academics. This was the English Civil War era.
Right. So the king and parliament are at war, the church is in total upheaval, and parliament calls this massive assembly of over 100 prominent theologians to Westminster Abbey.
Just a completely low-pressure environment.
Oh, yeah. Practically a vacation.
Right.
But they were there to fundamentally restructure the doctrine and worship of the Church of England. The pressure on this group was just unimaginable.
Right.
And out of this single assembly of men, within a very brief span of time, they produced two distinct world-changing documents.
The Westminster Confession of Faith and the Westminster Shorter Catechism.
Yes. Same men, same historical moment, same core beliefs. But they structure these two documents completely differently.
The contrast is staggering, isn't it?
It really is. The confession, which was designed for scholars, ministers, and, public theological debate, opens with a chapter on Holy Scripture.
So it begins with the source of knowledge. It begins with method.
Exactly. But the Shorter Catechism, this was a document designed to be memorized by ordinary people, by congregants, by children.
Right.
It does not open with method. It opens with arguably the most famous question in Protestant history. What is the chief end of man?
To glorify God
Yeah.
and to enjoy him forever.
Yes. Notice the shift there. It begins with a living creature standing in relation to a living God. It begins with purpose, with life, with relationship.
One body of men, the same brief span of time, but two entirely different beginnings.
Which proves the point. They knew exactly what they were doing.
They weren't just describing the inevitable structure of the universe. They were making a pedagogical choice.
Precisely. They chose a methodological sequence for the scholars debating in the halls of power and a relational sequence for the child sitting at the kitchen table.
They understood their audience, and they adjusted the sequence accordingly. But fast forward to the modern classroom, right?
Right. The scholastic sequence, putting method first, has kind of calcified into the absolute only way to approach the subject academically.
A decision made purely about an audience hundreds of years ago hardened into a rigid claim about the nature of reality itself. We forgot it was a choice, so we assume it is the territory.
Exactly. We mistook the map for the land.
So, if a shape cannot be argued with, and if we are currently trapped in a shape that prioritizes our own methodology over ultimate reality, how do we break out?
That's the big question.
We need a way to dismantle the filing cabinet without destroying the files inside. And this is where the sources offer a massive corrective by introducing a different framework.
The triad of love, light, and life.
Yes, and separating them into three distinct orders.
This is the crux of their argument. The authors are pushing back against those traditional analytical containers. They argue that the Johannine writings in the New Testament offer a completely different architecture.
John declares that God is love, God is light, and God is life.
Right. But the danger is that humans will try to sequence those three things. To prevent us from making catastrophic category errors, The sources break this triad down into the nominal order, the pedagogical order, and the ontological order.
Let's walk through these because this is where the philosophy gets incredibly practical for you listening. Let's start with the nominal order. It is listed as love, life, light. Why that specific arrangement?
The nominal order is simply the name. It is how we refer to the triad in casual conversation, or how you might, print it on the cover of a book.
Okay, so just a label.
Yeah. It is love, life, and light, because that is how it rests most comfortably in the human ear. It sounds poetic, has a rhythmic balance.
Right.
But the crucial thing to understand here is that the nominal order privileges no beginning, because reality itself privileges no beginning. It is just a label.
It is the title on the folder, not the contents of the folder. I get that. But then we shift to pedagogical order, and this is where the sequence becomes incredibly rigid and fiercely defended in the text.
Oh, absolutely.
The pedagogical order is light, then love, then life. Break that down for me. Why must light always, inevitably come first when we are learning?
Because of our position in the universe. A creature always approaches ultimate truth from the outside. We are finite. Truth is infinite.
Okay.
We begin in the dark, encumbered by our own flawed vocabularies, our biases, and our narrow human experiences. Therefore, something has to reach us from the outside. That is light.
Light as revelation.
Yes, light is the active disclosure of reality as it actually is, piercing through our preconceived notions. You absolutely must be shown the truth before you can possibly respond to it.
That makes total sense. You can't navigate a room if the lights are off. You will just stumble around bumping into the furniture you imagine is there, rather than the furniture that actually exists.
That's a perfect way to put it. And that leads directly to love coming second in the learning sequence.
Because you can't love what you can't see.
Exactly. The sources are absolutely unyielding on this point. Nothing is loved which has not been shown. Love requires an object presented to the mind. You cannot reorder your will toward the good if you do not know what the good actually is.
That makes profound psychological sense. If I don't know who a person is, I can't love them. I can only love my imaginary projection of them.
Yes, beautifully said. So, light reveals reality, breaking through the darkness of our assumptions. Love is the subsequent reordering of the human will toward that newly revealed reality.
And then life comes third.
Life is the culmination. It is the embodiment of what has been seen in the light and loved in the will. It is the actualization, the flourishing, the standing firmly in that reality.
So, light, love, life is the unbreakable, necessary path of human learning and spiritual formation.
Unbreakable for us, yes. But here is the magnificent pivot in the source material. We reach the third category, which is the ontological order.
Ontology being the study of being, of what things actually are in their ultimate, truest reality.
Right. So if we ask what the ontological order of love, light, and life is in God himself,
Or in ultimate reality.
the answer is that there isn't one. The ontological order is none at all.
None at all.
Right. In reality, in the Tao of nature, the three coin here,
Yeah.
they exist simultaneously, eternally, and completely.
Mm.
Each contains and implies the others.
So to say God is light is to say he's love.
Exactly. And to say he is love is to say he is life. It is a circle with no point of entry because it is not entered. It just is. There is no first, there is no second, and there is no last.
I want to make sure you, the listener, really feel the weight of this distinction, because it sounds like a very subtle, almost pedantic philosophical hair to split.
It sounds like it, but it's not.
Right. Why does treating a learning sequence, our pedagogical necessity, as ultimate reality break our understanding of the universe so badly?
It is dangerous because confusing these orders is the primary error of traditional educational systems, and it leads to, essentially, idolatry of the intellect.
Idolatry of the intellect. Wow.
Yet when you take the pedagogical order, the undeniable fact that we finite creatures have to learn things in a sequence, step by step, and you project that onto reality itself, you fracture the universe. You substitute how we learn for what is actually true.
Okay, let me try a metaphor here. Think about a high school biology class. If a teacher wants to explain how a frog works to a room full of teenagers, how do they do it?
They have to dissect it.
Exactly. They pin the frog to a board. On Tuesday, they teach the circulatory system. On Wednesday, they teach the respiratory system. On Thursday, the nervous system. The teacher separates the parts so the finite minds in the room can grasp them one at a time.
Right. That is the pedagogical order.
But the ontological reality, the actual truth of the frog, is that it is a single, living, jumping organism The heart doesn't exist before the lungs. They coin here. They rely on each other simultaneously. If you try to separate them in reality, you kill the frog.
You've captured the exact hazard perfectly. If the student walks out of that biology class believing that a frog is actually just a collection of disconnected organs that happen to be stapled together, they have profoundly misunderstood reality.
They took the Tuesday lesson and made it a law of nature.
Yes. In theology, if you think light comes sequentially before love and God, you are saying God is composed of parts, or that he changes over time, reacting to stimuli.
Which violates the classical understanding that God is simple, whole, and unchanging.
Exactly. You're making ultimate reality complex and composite. We dissect things to learn them because our brains are small, but reality is alive and whole.
So the tragedy is that the student masters the dissection but never actually encounters the living creature. And that brings us to a severe, immensely practical consequence. If we have to learn a sequence, if light absolutely must come first because we need reality revealed to us, what happens when that initial light reveals that our foundational vocabulary is entirely broken?
Oh, this is where the rubber meets the road for anyone who has ever tried to teach anything meaningful. The sources stress the incredible danger of trying to teach a concept without first correcting the student's pre-existing vocabulary.
And the prime example they use is arguably the most loaded, corrupted word in the entire human language.
Love.
Love, it really is the ultimate test case, because when a person hears the word love, their mind doesn't pull up a blank, pristine whiteboard.
No, not at all. Their definition is already completely full.
It is stuffed to the brim. It is filled with their human experiences, how their parents treated them, their romantic triumphs and failures, their friendships, their own self-regard.
It is a working definition drawn entirely from finite, flawed creatures. It is conditional, it is often transactional, and it is deeply tied to shifting emotions.
So what happens when a textbook or a professor or a pastor simply stands up and says, "You must love God"?
Well, the student naturally applies their existing uncorrected definition of the word. They take all that human sentiment, all that conditional affection, all that transactional emotional baggage, and they try to aim it upward.
But the sources point out how the Apostle John handles this brilliantly in his first epistle. John writes, "Herein is love, not that we love God, but that he loved us."
Not that we love God. He stops the reader right in their tracks.
He really does.
He corrects the referent before he ever uses it to demand anything of the reader. He anticipates that you will supply your own flawed definition, and he forcefully forbids it before it can take root.
He defines love by exclusion first.
Exactly. He essentially says, whatever you thought love was, empty it out. It is not what you did, it is what he did.
Let's look closer at the psychology of that shift, because it is massive. Think about the man sitting in the pew, or the student at the desk. If he is told that God loves him, and he must love God back, without anyone correcting the word love, how does he internalize that?
He hears a demand to produce a colossal quantity of human sentiment.
Right. He hears, "Try harder to feel affection for an invisible being." It feels like an impossible, exhausting imposition on his emotional reserves.
It leads to immediate burnout, or hypocrisy, honestly. But if you correct the word first, if you provide the light before you demand the love, the demand changes kind entirely.
The man realizes that what he previously called love was never the real thing to begin with.
Exactly. He is no longer being asked to produce a massive quantity of a feeling he already possesses. He's being told that his entire previous vocabulary was hopelessly inadequate.
It is like trying to install a massive, high-tech software update on a corrupted hard drive. If you don't completely reformat the drive first, if you don't wipe the core concepts clean, the new software just adopts all the old bugs, integrates with the malware, and eventually crashes the whole system.
And reformatting the drive requires more than just reading a dictionary definition. The text says, "In this was manifested the love of God." The word manifested is crucial here.
Why is that?
Because a simple spoken definition isn't enough to overwrite a lifetime of human experience. If I just define a new term for you, you're left with your old, deeply felt idea, plus the mere intellectual belief that your idea is inadequate.
So you need an experience.
Yes. What replaces a broken referent is an actual encounter with the thing itself. It must be manifested.
So if the sequence of learning is this incredibly delicate, if you have to carefully strip away false definitions, provide light, manifest the reality, and reorder the will, it requires an architect who knows exactly what they are doing.
It requires a master teacher who is intimately aware of the pedagogical sequence, absolutely.
But what happens when the architect of the sequence is no longer a master teacher? What happens when the sequence is dictated by an administrative bureaucracy.
That is the quiet disaster outlined in the sources, when they contrast historical intention with modern institutional convenience. They use John Calvin's Institutes of the Christian Religion, published in its final form in 1559, as a foil for how modern education operates.
Let's set the stage in 1559 for a second. The Institutes is one of the most influential texts in Western history. How did Calvin handle this massive problem of sequence?
Calvin opened his work with this breathtakingly honest admission. He stated that true and sound wisdom consists of two parts, the knowledge of God and the knowledge of ourselves.
Okay.
But then he immediately confesses that these two are bound together by so many ties that it's not easy to say which precedes and brings forth the other.
He is acknowledging the ontological coherence we talked about with the frog.
Yes. In ultimate reality, you cannot know God without knowing yourself as a creature, and you cannot know yourself truly without seeing God. They are an unbreakable circle.
So he refuses to order them in reality. He admits the circle exists.
He does. But then, just 2 sections later, he makes a deliberate executive decision. He writes that the order of right teaching requires that the knowledge of God be discussed first. And then he spends 4 entire books doing exactly that.
He separates the ontological reality from the pedagogical necessity. He acknowledges the living frog, but tells the reader, for the sake of your understanding, I am going to dissect it.
Right. I am putting God first for the sake of teaching. And he stated those pedagogical grounds on page 1.
He owned his sequence.
Completely. But the sources trace what happened over the subsequent centuries, and it is a masterclass in how institutional memory decays.
Oh boy, what happened?
The theological tradition that followed Calvin kept his arrangement. God first, then man, but they completely lost his reason for it.
Why does that happen? Why do institutions keep the structure but lose the rationale?
Well, because a sequence justified on stated grounds by one generation is repeated by the next generation, who find it already in place. The next generation doesn't repeat the grounds because a thing already standing doesn't seem to need a reason to stand.
It just is. It is the air they breathe.
Right. 2 generations later, the order is just the order. Nobody defends it. Nobody attacks it. It stops being a pedagogical claim you can argue with and hardens into an invisible architecture.
So the decision made purely for the sake of helping 16th century students learn hardened into a rigid claim about the nature of the universe.
Exactly. And now contrast Calvin's fierce intentionality with how curricula are designed today. The sources argue forcefully that modern curriculum committees settle sequence on administrative grounds, not theological or philosophical ones.
Let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around this. Are you saying that the way millions of students are taught to perceive the deepest truths of the universe is currently being dictated by, what, the arbitrary shape of a 15-week academic calendar?
Yes. It is decided by accreditation cycles. It is decided by which faculty members are available to teach in the fall versus the spring semester.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it is decided by the need to offer 3 credit-hour blocks to satisfy federal financial aid requirements.
Yeah.
The most consequential decision in a student's formation, the sequence that will build their hidden standard of truth, is an administrative compromise, not a pedagogical strategy.
That is just bleak. The difference between Calvin in 1559 and a modern university course catalog is not that one forces a sequence and the other does not.
No, both of them force a sequence.
Both of them force the student down a highly specific path, but only one of them knows it.
Anonymity is not neutrality. That is the phrase the sources use, and it is devastating. A curriculum that cannot name the author of its own sequence has not escaped having one. It has only lost track of who made it.
And the student pays the ultimate price because they absorb this anonymous, administratively driven sequence as the absolute shape of reality.
When you are trapped in an anonymous sequence, you end up accepting artificial structures as the natural world. You mistake the filing cabinet for the forest.
And when the grounds for an educational sequence are forgotten, students are forced to accept artificial boundaries, which leads to a profound crisis students who master a system without ever being transformed by it.
This is where the framework offers a really poignant historical critique of how we teach the great creeds of the church, like the Council of Nicaea or Chalcedon.
How does the traditional system teach them?
Well, the traditional system treats these creeds as foundational building blocks, the very first things a student must learn. But the sources argue that creeds are not foundations. Creeds are fences.
Fences. Walk me through the mechanics of that metaphor. Why a fence?
A creed was historically written because a specific heresy arose. Someone attacked a core truth, so the church gathered and built a precise, highly philosophical fence to keep that specific error out.
Okay, let's look at the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. The church didn't just wake up one day and decide to write a complex document about the Trinity.
Right, they were responding to a man named Arius.
And Arius wasn't just a quiet academic. He was incredibly persuasive. He was essentially writing catchy worship songs, arguing that Jesus was a created being.
Right, his famous line was, "There was a time when the sun was not." And his ideas were spreading like wildfire through Alexandria.
It caused an absolute panic in the early church because it threatened the core of the faith.
So the bishops gather at Nicaea, and they coin a very specific Greek term, homoousios.
Meaning of one substance.
Exactly. They declare that the Father and the Son are of the exact same substance. They erected a massive, impenetrable philosophical fence because Arius had climbed into the field.
So the fence was a defensive measure. It was reactionary.
But look at how it is taught in the modern classroom.
Yeah.
The sequence is inverted. The student is taught the fence before they are ever shown the field.
Oh, I see.
They are forced to memorize complex Greek philosophical terms like homoousios before they are immersed in the scriptural declarations of love, light, and life.
And because the sequence is backward, the fence looks totally arbitrary. To the modern student, it looks like a massive stone wall standing in the middle of a beautiful meadow for absolutely no reason.
They haven't met any Arians. They don't know the field is under attack.
They haven't felt the panic of the 4th century. They are just told to memorize the dimensions of the wall and pass a test on it.
So they memorize the wall, they pass the test, and their inner life remains completely untouched. They have mastered the defense mechanism of a previous generation without ever encountering the beauty of the thing being defended.
And institutions know this is happening. They can see that the students aren't being transformed, which leads to what the sources call the ultimate tell of a broken educational system.
The integration course?
Anyone who has been to grad school or seminary or even a robust undergraduate program knows exactly what you were talking about, the capstone seminar.
Right. At the very end of a 3 or 4 year program, there is almost always a required course explicitly designed to integrate all the different disciplines the student has studied: history, philosophy, ethics, theology.
And what do the sources say about this?
They make a piercing observation. They say, a curriculum that requires a course to integrate it has said where its seam is. Nobody builds a course to join things that were never apart.
That is just brutal, but so true. The remedy names the disease. If you have to spend an entire semester trying to put the pieces back together, it is a glaring admission that you spent the last 3 years tearing a unified reality into artificial fragments.
It proves that the student was attending to the arrangement the entire time, not the reality. When a student remains spiritually or intellectually unaltered by years of rigorous study, traditional educators often blame the student.
They say the student lacked willpower or that the knowledge just couldn't make the leap from the head to the heart.
But this structural critique argues that the failure is not in the student's heart. The failure is that the object of the student's attention was the taxonomy itself. They were studying the folders, not the files. They were studying the dissection board, not the frog.
They spent 3 years memorizing the user manual, and they never looked the person in the eye. You can navigate the terms and conditions perfectly, but you are a stranger to the relationship, and that is a tragic way to learn.
It is a tragedy of sequence. Because a system can be carried out of a room by a person it never actually touched. A student can graduate with honors and remain completely untransformed.
And that is not a failure of the system's accuracy. The facts on the test might have been 100% correct.
Exactly. It is a report on what the person was actually forced to look at by the unstated architecture of the syllabus.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today, from 17th century England to modern university accreditation boards, from the psychology of how we define love to the structural dissection of a frog. What is the ultimate takeaway for the person listening right now?
Well, I think
If they are sitting in a corporate training seminar or helping their kid with high school homework or just trying to be a well-informed citizen, how do they apply this? The core message seems to be that to truly pursue wisdom, you cannot just passively absorb data.
No, you can't. You have to actively question the unstated architecture of how that data is being presented to you. You have to become aware of the invisible architect.
Asking the right question.
Right. Ask, why am I being shown this before that? What assumptions are built into this syllabus, this textbook, this corporate training manual? Because if you do not ask those questions, you are adopting someone else's hidden standard of truth without even realizing it.
You are accepting their pedagogical conveniences or their administrative compromises as ontological realities.
You are accepting the map as the territory.
Beautifully put.
You must remember the three orders. Know what a thing is called, the nominal. Understand the necessary sequential path you must walk to learn it. Light revealing reality, then love reordering the will, then life embodying the truth.
And never forget the ontological.
Right. Never, ever forget that in reality, in its ultimate nature, truth is a coherent circle. It is whole. It is alive. It cannot be chopped up into a 15-week syllabus without losing some of its life. You dissect it to learn it, but you must put it back together to live it.
We promised you at the start of this deep dive that you would question the structure of every textbook you've ever been handed, and I think the sources delivered on that promise in spades. But I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over today.
Oh, I like where this is going.
Something that builds on everything we've discussed today about sequences and hidden standards, but pushes it out of the classroom and into your immediate daily present.
If our highest forms of theological and philosophical education have been quietly, accidentally shaped by administrative convenience and forgotten pedagogical decisions over centuries.
What about the algorithms that feed us our daily news and social media?
Wow.
We don't have a syllabus anymore. We have a feed. The algorithm is the ultimate, unstated, anonymous sequence of our era.
It really is.
What hidden standard of truth is being built in your mind right now by the mere sequence of your digital timeline? If an unstated sequence dictates what you believe is basic and true, what artificial structures are you passively accepting as reality every time you scroll? Remember, the floor plan is dictating your steps. You might want to ask who drew the blueprints.